SpectreVision Radio.
Hello, fellow lover of dark matter. If you've been suffering from a persistent desire for just a little more unpleasantness in your life, we have the answer. The Nocturnal Transmissions Podcast. It's a celebration of horror and just good old-fashioned storytelling. Aliens, bullshit. Oh, come on, Mr. Joint Chiefs Chairman. You were just in your bedroom one moment and in the president's bedroom the next. Who on this backwater planet could have done that? It was crawling towards him. And in the pale glow of the flashlight, the man saw a frightful gargoyle face thrust into his own. It was the passionless death's head skull of a long-dead corpse. The Nocturnal Transmissions Podcast, now transmitting in association with SpectreVision Radio. Come, get some.
SpectreVision Radio.
Hello and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast, where we listen to people's fairy encounters. But take heed, we're not talking about winged Tinkerbells here. These are real fairies, real encounters that took people like you and I by surprise. Stay a while and hear their stories. My name is Jo Hickey Hall, and I'm a folklore researcher. Hello everybody and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast. I'm Jo Hickey Hall and this time with me I have Morgan Daimler, who probably needs no introduction to anybody interested in fairy research, fairy folklore and all things fae. Welcome, Morgan.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have a chance to chat with you today.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming actually, because we've sort of both got busy schedules, and I'm really delighted that we've got this chance. Now, you are a prolific author and also a witch and priestess. Could you tell us a little bit about how you came into, contact with these realms in terms of your career, your life? It's more than a career. It's your life's work, isn't it?
It's definitely a passion for me. Yes. I never exactly intended to end up where I'm at today with things, but life is unpredictable like that. I have had experiences with the good folk pretty much as far back as I can remember. And when I was in my teens, I started diving into Irish mythology and, more general fairy lore kind of stuff. And for me, I really found that it provided kind of an essential context for things. I've grown up in the Irish American diaspora, which is an interesting experience. And so I did have a degree of Irish folklore in my life as a child, but it's anything in the Irish American diaspora is like a step sideways from what you would find actually in Ireland. So it's not exactly the same over here, but it's a connecting thread, I guess we could say. And then that eventually led me to start to write about fairies. Mostly because I found that a lot of people in the US, when they were talking about fairies or even in some cases like teaching about them, they were really leaning into the sort of pop culture version that we have over here, which is very twee and very nature spirit. And I'm not trying to sound judgmental to people who believe those things, because belief is a very wide and varied thing. And with fairies, I don't think there is any right or wrong necessarily. But I found that people were labeling things Irish belief or using terms for Irish beings that just didn't actually connect to the folklore. Not out of maliciousness, it's just they genuinely didn't realize that was happening. So I started writing about them. I'm trying to think now. I did my first public workshop talking about fairies in 2000. I realize how old that makes me sound, but that's where we're at. And then I started writing about them around 2006 for the same purpose. I was just trying to get information out to people, believe it, don't believe it, whatever your position is on it. And then in 2019, I started getting into the more academic end of things, sort of as an active folklorist. And I love all of these things equally. So kind of everything is centered on fairies, my spiritual belief, my personal experiences, my academic work. Like you said, it's like a calling.
This is it. All these threads, everything that you're doing kind of coming together. And I guess, I'm imagining a lot of the time it's informed by, because you have a lot of followers, you have people that, will go to you for specific information. And I wonder how much your work is kind of shaped by that as well. Sure, because there's a response too, isn't there? When you're leaning into this work, that you meet people, you either, are inspired by them in some way, but often I imagine the questions and queries that you're being asked by people may even lead you into some new areas that you didn't expect.
Definitely. I think in a lot of ways it's a bit of a co-creative process.
Yeah.
And I find myself in a fairly unique position with where I'm at currently, because I have been a witch for the majority of my life. I've obviously been pagan for that same amount of time, because those two things coincide for me. And I also don't hesitate to talk about my personal experiences, which are what led me into the more academic side of things. And I find that a lot of people, when they think of folklorists or they think of people in an academic position, they think of skeptics, and they think of people who don't believe in this, but are approaching it more to collect information. So I find that people are more willing to talk to me about things because they don't feel that I'm that far away from them, or that I'm approaching it with how can I rationally explain what happened? And my approach has always been to just take people's experiences as they are. I don't judge them. I don't try to change them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it would be really amazing to hear about your experiences. And I said to you before we started as well, it's a very personal thing. And I think sometimes we might think that we're willing to share something, and actually when it comes to it, it's kind of, you're getting a no, so I will always say, just share what feels right to share. And but I would love to hear kind of, because I had read particularly in I think your 21st Century Fairy, got all my books in it. I've got a number of your books actually, and I'm pretty sure I've got even more than this lot here, but I've got this one too, which is brilliant.
Fairies. Thank you.
Excellent. And this one, which I'm just reading at the moment, and we'll get onto that shortly, because this is your newest release. And I'm sure I've got some more sprinkled around that I can put my hands on. But yeah, so I had read in particular about your encounter with a kind of modern type fairyland, and this really intrigued me. I wonder if we could start there, because that's
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So the way that I engage with this sort of thing, I do sometimes have what I guess define as waking experiences. But I also have a lot of experiences that happen in like a dream state or a trance state. And I know, of course, in the 21st century, people hear dreams and they immediately sort of dismiss it, like this is your mind speaking to itself. But dreaming up until the last 120, 130 years was always sort of seen as a real experience. The idea was if you went to fairyland in a dream, that was just as valid and real as the waking world. And that's sort of the approach that I take to it as well, which I realize sounds a little strange because I do, my actual degree is in psychology. So I probably should be sitting here arguing about why, interpreting it as your mind is more valid. But I personally have never felt that way. So I've had several experiences where I believe, of course, all of this is open to what people do and do not believe, but I believe I visited or went to places that were not in the human world, that were in the world of fairy, the other world, whatever we want to call it. And as opposed to the more sort of antiquated world that people expect, I would find myself oftentimes in cities, and they would look very much like, cities in the human world, except there wasn't anything iron around, or there weren't any cars, like that sort of a thing. And it just felt very real in the context it was happening in. And when I had these experiences and was in these sort of urban settings, I, of course, at the time when these initially were happening, was like, well, is this legitimate though? Because, of course, everyone talks about fairy as this sort of medieval reality, really, when you look at what people share for experiences. And so I had actually talked to a few friends and found out that several people had had similar experiences. One was not urban, but he had experienced sort of a suburban area where he believed he had gone and, again, traveled to the world of fairy. And instead of it being either very rural or sort of that older expectation, he found himself in what seemed like a very suburban area, but not in this reality. And I have another friend, Kat Heath, who also writes a great deal about sort of modern pagan and witchcraft, fairy related things. And Kat described being in what seemed like a big train station. No trains were there, but sort of that structure for people who've been in train stations, and it was a transitional place. You could go from there to other places. So this is why I said earlier, I feel like this is a bit of a co-creative process. Yeah. Not that I didn't trust my own experience, but hearing that other people had similar experiences definitely made me feel more solid in sharing it.
Even as you're saying it, there's a kind of, what was the feeling sense there in this place?
So I've had city experiences a few times. One time it was rather eerie because it was definitely in a city. It seemed to be very late at night. It was very dark, but there weren't a lot of people around. It was like everything was very quiet and very still, even though it was clearly a city. Lots of tall buildings. In that particular experience, I was sitting in what seemed like a cafe, sort of a setting, like an outdoor patio attached to a cafe with, tables and chairs, but really no one else was around. So it didn't feel dangerous in any way, but it definitely felt eerie. A little bit of, where is everyone? Another time I had a similar city experience, but there were people. But it was like being in a human city, like everyone's doing their own thing, walking on the sidewalks. There again weren't any cars. I've never experienced cars myself in the other world, which is not to say that they are not there. There was actually quite a famous thing that happened in England called the Wallerton Gnomes, where several school children experienced these. They describe them as gnomes, but small fairy-like beings in cars, in little cars. So I don't want to make anyone think that cars don't exist in this context. I just personally have never experienced them there.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that case because Kate Ray and Rushton and I went and had a mooch about a couple of times down at Woolerton. That was really interesting. We found that where the cars had appeared, it was in a swamp-like area, and we think we found the swamp-like area. But anyway, that's another story.
Oh, fascinating!
Yeah, it really was.
Yeah, I love that case for many reasons, but yeah, I'm sure that was a fascinating conversation that you three had.
Well, we were there for a whole day, and at one point I went down underneath because it's a Tudor, so it's an Elizabethan kind of mansion, and then underneath there are tunnels because the rock is so soft there that you could use a spoon and dig into it.
Wow.
What a lot of people did. But underneath there was really a presence. And I just think that whole place is alive with, it's teeming with other worlds, basically. So yeah, you must, if you're coming to the UK, you must go and check it out for yourself. But going back to your experience there, when you mentioned that there were people kind of going along and kind of getting on with their business, did they look like you and I, or did they look different?
So the majority of the time, when I experience these things or when I've had these encounters, the beings that I see mostly, not always, but mostly tend to look very human. There's not immediately something like you would look at them and say, like, they don't have pointed ears, they don't have wings, they don't have anything that we've kind of been conditioned to expect. They look fairly human, but there's something about them that clearly isn't.
Yeah.
It's sort of an energy or a presence that they have, which is obviously very hard to put into words to explain. But yeah, so it was, I never had a moment in that context where I felt like these are humans. I'm in a place and there's humans here. I felt more like I stood out because I wasn't matching that energy, that presence.
That's really interesting. And, I've spoken to people before that have talked about coming into relation with people that are not people, if in their own words, the people that are not people. And so there is a definite sense of that when it happens, when something just not quite right. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. I've also spoken to people who had like real world, I guess you would say, encounters with a being that initially they thought was human.
Yeah.
And then kind of quickly pieced together that something else was going on and that this was not a human person. And I'm sure I mentioned some of those in that 21st Century Fairy book, but usually it would be a case where the person, the quote unquote person, the otherworldly person, would have knowledge that there was no way they could have. And a lot of times they appear kind of inexplicably and then disappear with no physical way for that to have occurred. So I do believe people encounter them in the waking world, not just in dreams and things.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like often it's the way they move as well. I know myself having seen something, but in terms of people looking like humans, they often are able to, well, first of all, pass through, material structure, and moving in a way either very fast or unlike we move our bodies, as if moving at speed or with a certain strange gait to them that marks them out, having had, strange encounters with them. So, yeah, it's very interesting. And so, yeah, what other sorts of experiences have you had? Because if you've had what seems like more of a modern fairyland encounter, and when I think of you and your work and your close, connection with particularly the Celtic, fairy lore, I think about the the nature that surrounds all of that. And I wonder, have you had experiences yourself that relate to more sort of natural environments?
Sure. So I should probably rephrase this by saying I've had a very strange life.
Okay.
As I mentioned, my earliest memories include experiences with beings, with things that there's no, I guess we'd say, rational explanation for. Obviously, anytime we talk about this subject, people can either choose to believe I had the experience or choose not to. I don't expect anyone to just inherently, believe what I'm saying. But one time there's a state park that's kind of semi-local, not too far from where I live. And it's a place that's fairly popular with the local pagan population, local witches, for a variety of reasons. And it has just a really interesting history to it. A lot of people have had experiences, uncanny experiences there going back, several hundred years at least. And I was there one day, and there's a river that runs through the area and a fairly significant waterfall, which is part of why people go there. And I was sort of off the path, wandering through the woods, as you do. And yep, as you do. And I had turned into this area, which was a smaller waterfall. So it was someplace where you kind of almost like a little box area. So you couldn't see into it until you sort of worked around into it. And I stepped around to where I could see the little waterfall, and immediately, the way the experience played out, immediately saw a woman in the water who was not a human person. She looked fairly human, in a physical form, very pale, very dark hair and dark eyes. And I looked at her and stopped, and she looked at me, and I just got a very intense feeling of not being welcome. Yeah. Sort of that feeling you have when you like walk into a room and interrupt something, and it's clear that like you need to gracefully remove yourself. And so that was what I did. I just kind of backed up, and I think I might have said something like, "I'm sorry," because the feeling wasn't outright hostile. Like I didn't feel like I was in physical danger necessarily, but it definitely was a "don't come any closer, you should not be here." And I always try to respect that, to listen to that intuition or whatever you want to call it. So I immediately kind of backed out, and then I went a different way. And I felt afterwards that was probably a spirit or, a fairy, whatever we want to label it, that was its home. I don't know if it was the spirit of the waterfall. I don't know if it was, something else that was attached to that area. But it definitely felt like that belonged there, and that it was her space, and I respected it and left.
I remember reading that one in your book, and
Okay.
yeah, and it's quite a chilling, a very definite sense of get out, get away.
Yes.
And there's no two ways about it. When you get that impression, you really know about it. I mean, it kind of moves through your body.
Yes, yes, for sure. I've definitely been places where I felt the opposite, where I felt very welcomed and
Sure. Yeah.
like I need to be here. But there have been a few instances. That was one. I was in Iceland in 2018,
Mm.
and the group I was with, we went to the place that is supposed to be the home of Gryla and the Yule lads,
Mm.
who are sort of these legendary figures in Icelandic folklore, connected particularly to Yule time, Christmas time. And we were very excited to be going there. There's a cave there that's supposed to belong to Gryla, and the whole area just has an amazing amount of folklore to it, which I always love, that sort of thing. And we got off the coach and in the parking lot, and I went to step into the park itself, and I immediately got a very intense feeling of no. No, I did not, I was not welcome there. Everyone else I was with went in and they had a great time, which is awesome. But I immediately felt like I should not be here. So I ended up kind of lurking by the car park, basically, until everyone else was ready to go. And I think it's interesting when we talk about these sorts of things. I don't run across a lot of people sharing stories like that.
Mm.
I run across people who talk about how they got somewhere and they immediately felt very welcomed, or they felt like they were coming home, and all of that, which is beautiful. But I do think we should maybe have more conversations about experiences where you get somewhere and you're like, oh no, I should not be here.
Definitely. I have felt that, and I felt that with places that later kind of somehow opened to me and
Mm.
over time. So I wonder if, I mean, obviously that was a trip for you that was quite a
Yeah.
special trip. It's not like you could go back the following year or something. You could potentially go back the following year, but it'd be interesting to go back there again and see if it's the same or different, because I know for myself, places that are very, very dear to me, and my most kind of sacred places that I love to go. Initially, decades and decades ago when I first visited, I got a very strong no, and I did, and I left, um, and I wasn't too keen on going back, but it,
Yeah.
it can change, and also I guess in terms of people talking about those kinds of experiences, often if it has kind of shocked them to the core, they don't want to talk about it. Even talking about it might
Yeah.
offend or bring it back. So you're right that there are those stories out there that they're less heard for those
Less,
reasons.
yeah, less common.
Less,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Thinking about this time of year now, because we're almost, well, we're almost at Samhain. It's
Mhm.
Today is the 14th that we're recording this in October. And yeah, at this time of year, there's an extra something in the air in terms of, people. Well, first of all, I feel like our awareness opens, for us, we really feel the kind of thinness, and of course, we're at that point where we're going inside, we're going internally into ourselves. And so, it brings things up for us at this time of year as well. So we're definitely more sensitive. So I
Mm.
just wonder if you have any kind of guidance. I was going to say tips, but it's more of a kind of wisdom or guidance for people at this time of year. What are people looking out for in terms of these realms? What do you feel would be helpful in order to, you know, perhaps open themselves? Because we can say, oh, well, I would like to, have more experience of these realms, but actually that's not our choice, is it? It's a kind of,
Right.
it's it's something that will happen when it happens. But in terms of us sort of readying ourselves with these worlds, what would you recommend?
Yeah. So I agree with what you just said. I think that the best thing about this time of year is that we are socially more open to these experiences. If you have an experience around Samhain, around Halloween, with a ghost, for example, a human ghost, I think people are more likely to be open to that and to share it than maybe at a different time of year. There's something about right now where people are just more willing to be open-minded about spirits. I'm a firm believer that they are always around us, but that most people were so socially conditioned to rationalize things. And even to the point of convincing ourselves that something didn't happen because it would sound ridiculous if we tried to explain it to someone. And when we hit this time of year, that changes. And I think people are more willing to put the skepticism aside, at least to some degree, and to be more open-minded. And of course, looking at the mythology and the folklore, this time of year and Byalchina, May Day, beginning of May, are seen as points when these beings, particularly fairies, are much more active. You're much more likely to have an experience or an encounter because they're more present in our world. And the biggest things I tell people who are interested in these things is, first of all, and you already touched on it, you can't force this to happen. It's one of those things that circumstances have to align a certain way, or you have to be in a certain place. You have to be receptive to it. You have to, there's all these different conditions to it. But I've known people who have spent decades trying to have a fairy experience, trying to, connect with this energy, and have had no luck with it at all. And I've known other people who want nothing to do with any of this. They don't want to have fairy experiences. They don't want to have anything unusual or uncanny happening around them, and yet they cannot get away from it. It just is something that they're prone to for whatever reason. And I think that that's the first thing I would tell people, is that you can certainly try to go to places that are reputed to have these activities, this energy, these spirits. You can be open to it, but whether it happens or not is kind of out of your hands. I also usually will tell people this time of year, if you're interested in these things, if you're trying to connect to this energy or have an experience, be careful how you approach it. Because that's another thing I've seen people do too often, which they want the experience so badly. They want some kind of proof or evidence to support their belief, that they'll sort of throw themselves face first into things. And I think it's always good to just keep in mind that not everything you might encounter is going to be positive. That's much like with humans, much like with animals, much like with the wilderness. There's a certain amount of risk in it. So I do encourage people, especially this time of year, to just be a little more aware of, I guess you'd say, like fairy safety precautions. Carry a little bit of iron on you, carry a little bit of salt. Know basic things like if you're being fairy led or pixie led, if you're lost in a familiar area because there's some enchantedness afoot, turn a piece of clothing inside out. Basic safety guidelines.
Yes.
Because I think that if you want to engage with this, now is the best time to try to do that. But go into it with an awareness of what potentially could go well and what potentially could be a problem. And that is definitely cynical on my part, but I've talked to too many people who had negative experiences, which were then hard to undo. So I'll give you an example, because I don't want to make this sound too vague, but I knew someone who very much wanted to connect with fairies, to do fairy work. And so around this time of year, they had sort of put out an invitation. They'd gone out in their yard, I think it was, and just said out loud, like, any fairy being, I would love to have an experience with you. I welcome you into my home. And you can probably see where this is going. And they did get a response, but the response, whatever it was that had come in, was very negative. And so they started having all sorts of problems and, like cabinets banging. Like, I guess we would describe it as poltergeist activity, although I obviously attribute it to fairies. But they came to me about this to try to figure out what to do to make it stop. And I was like, well, it's very tricky. When you've extended that welcome, you've basically given them permission to be in there. And particularly with fairies, I find that they can be very legalistic,
Right.
I guess you would say. Like, once you've sort of given consent to something, once you've told them they can come into your home, it's very hard to undo that. You can't just be like, I've changed my mind. You need to get out, because now they have as much right to be there as you do, from their perspective. So I always sort of caution people, just it's so much easier to avoid getting in that kind of situation than to try to fix it after the fact.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's the, you need to put the boundaries in place in terms of only good enter therein, or
Yes.
not into the home. You might be working and you might want to invite a specific, or you might be open to inviting something in to work with, but again, it has to be within, boundaries, really clear set boundaries.
Yep.
So what would you suggest in that? I mean, you can get really creative, can't you? Because
yes,
as much as you have opened things out, I guess things like rhyme, the use of whether something was perhaps, well, yeah, I'm keen to hear what you would suggest in those kinds of circumstances then. How did you advise them in the end? What happened?
Ultimately, I gave them a couple options. The first thing I said was, you can try to negotiate with this, which is what I always encourage people to do initially. Whatever the situation is, if you feel like you're in a negative encounter, particularly if it's in or around your home, offer them something that you're willing to part with in exchange for them either stopping the activity that's upsetting you or going somewhere else. Bribery with fairies is something I highly recommend to people. And I realize that sounds bad, but it's an effective way a lot of times to deal with these situations. Dairy products are a popular option. With that particular person, nothing was really working. And so ultimately, I had suggested that they get put iron horseshoes up over their doors, and try to have something made of iron or steel in the areas that they were having problems with. And that did ultimately solve the issue. That's not my normal immediate go-to, because obviously that's just going to make whatever is there angrier, that you're forcing it out. But sometimes that becomes the only option.
Yeah, that's the kind of nuclear option then.
Yes, that's a great way to describe it. Yes. But, when people are having particularly dangerous things happening, and this particular person, besides the disruption that they were experiencing at several points, had physical accidents that resulted in injuries. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's when it's gone over, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I guess, I think it's a good point to make to people at this time of year, don't put fairy doors in your home. Have it somewhere outside, some space that's manageable, and because that is something that that people might do for their children as a nice thing, particularly maybe at this time of year. And it's a very good idea.
No, I'm personally a fan of fairy houses outside, in the garden, in more wild places. But I do generally advise people to be very cautious about anything in the home, especially fairy doors, because you have less control over what you're inviting into your space. And again, most people approach that with a everything's welcome kind of, which is not something I would recommend. And once something's in, as we were just saying, it can be very hard to get it to leave again.
I mean, this is because people don't know the folklore. This is because we've been fed the sorts of, ideas of fairies and their realms that don't reflect the reality in most cases. And so, we're sort of lost coming to this unless you have looked at the folklore and heard about, real encounters.
Yes.
So that's where we are in society, isn't it? But hopefully, do you feel like more and more people are starting to, I really feel like there's been a bit of a sea change and people are starting to understand again and learn. They want to learn. It's not just that, they want to learn about the folklore of their area, which is a really great place to start. Start with where you are, look at the stories, the indigenous stories of wherever it is you live, because that's where you're really going to start to learn things.
Yes. Yeah. And I completely agree that there has been a sea change, as you said. Having been connected to this for as long as I have, and having come into witchcraft and paganism when I did, which was in the very early 90s, I've kind of gotten to see for myself, and obviously I'm not the only person who can say this, but the way that it was in the 1990s and the early 2000s, it did really lean into the sort of theosophical post-Victorian fairy as the little tiny winged sprite who, just wants to help your garden be extra lovely. And within the last probably 10 or 15 years, I have noticed that starting to change, where people are more open to the idea that these spirits are not 100% fans of humanity. If you open books from the 1990s that talk about fairies, particularly witchcraft-oriented ones, you often will see these beings treated as if they have nothing better to do than just wait around for some human to do a spell to invoke them so that they can guard that person's cat, which is an actual spell in an actual witchcraft book in the 1990s. And I think we've hit a point now, which I personally appreciate, where people are much more seeing them as independent spirits with their own agency, who they can be your allies in some cases, but not all of them are helpful. Not all of them want to engage with humans, and some of them can be dangerous. And personally, I think that's a good thing. Not to say that I don't know people who have only ever had positive experiences, because I do. I've talked to people who seem to primarily have around them those sort of winged sprite type of beings, the stereotypical Tinkerbell kind of fairies, and have done it for decades and never had a single, difficult thing happen. But I have talked to so many other people who have had negative experiences, or even in some cases physical injuries and things that have happened from these spirits. And so I think that we're in a better place than we were, a few decades ago, where people see the diversity of it all, and it isn't just pigeonholed into one very specific human-friendly kind of thing.
Thank you. I'm wondering, do you feel that our, human relationship with fairies has changed? And potentially, I'm wondering whether from their point of view as well, if that's something that you're privy to, do you feel that the relationship is changing?
I think that it is. And this is something I believe has been going on for about the last 10 years. I've discussed this again with friends, particularly Kat Heath. And there are several of us, starting about 10 years ago, who started to feel like there was just an increased presence of these beings in the human world, that they were more active, more here than they had been. And over the last 10 years, particularly the last 5 years, that seems to have amped up. More people are having experiences, more people are talking about experience they're having. More and more witches seem drawn to work with fairies in one context or another than there used to be. And the subject is just being taken more seriously, I think, than it had been. And I do believe that that is a mutual thing. I think that, humans are reaching out more to that energy, and also that the good folk, for their various assorted reasons, are reaching back. And of course, we're talking about this in like a very broad, general way. When we're talking about fairies, even though we talk about like it's an umbrella term for all these things, of course, there's many different groups and beings and things that are going on in there. And I don't necessarily think all of them are positive, that are more present.
No, absolutely.
But I do think they are more present. And it's nice to see people taking the folklore more seriously, because it does help prevent bad things from happening, at least in some cases. And I'm kind of cheered to see, particularly with witches, that we're moving away from seeing fairies as like beings to command, and more into a place with more people being open to it being more of like an alliance or a friendship type of situation.
Yeah, and a guidance. There's often a sense, if you're able to, and it's a bit like opening to the deep inner self as well, in that if you allow yourself to open in safe circumstances, and ones which feel familiar to you, over time you can, or in fact, to say over time, I had one time where it was a kind of instant thing that I was led somewhere. It was very interesting, actually. It kind of came in on what I now know was a fairy wind. Well, I wasn't aware of that at the time, but it was a very specific thing that they were guiding me to do, which was to do with a landscape not too far from where I live. But I know that it can happen, like that. But more often, it's allowing yourself to open in safety to these worlds in a particular way, that you then receive some guidance about something that is important in your life. And I wonder if that's what's behind this leaning in of those realms to ours. I mean, let's face it, we're in a complete state, aren't we, humanity? And
we are.
We need the help.
Yeah.
We need the guidance.
I agree. One of the things I've been studying sort of in depth across particularly the last 3 years is sort of the early modern Scottish witchcraft approach to fairies, I guess is the way to explain that. And it's really driven home to me the fact that, particularly for witches, dealing with fairies, learning from fairies, having these alliances with these beings, so something that goes back quite a long ways. And I think we're coming into a bit of a revival of that sort of approach. I do believe, as much as I always start by cautioning people, that it can be dangerous and to be careful and there's risk and all that, I do believe there are a lot of benefits to having these connections or having these experiences, even if it just comes down to you have an experience that opens your mind to there being more out there. I've talked to a lot of people who were initially coming from a place of complete disbelief and then had an experience that just cannot be explained in any other way. And it led to them being more open-minded and more willing to, consider these things. And I want to share a quick story, because what you said about sort of being drawn to, with the fairy wind and being drawn to something that ended up then being clarified later as a project you needed to work on. This also happened when I was in Iceland. I will say, for people who haven't been to Iceland, it is a very inspirited place. There is just a lot of things happening in Iceland. And while I was there, about halfway through my stay there, I started getting sick. Just upper respiratory, low fever, kind of sick. But it was getting to the point where I talked to the other people I was with, and we were trying to decide whether I should maybe try to go to like an urgent care, or find a chemist and get some medication, or what we were going to do. And we were only there for a certain amount of time, and there were specific things we were supposed to be doing and seeing, and I really didn't want to ruin everyone else's trip with this. So the place we were at, we had sort of a free day. A lot of people went horseback riding, because Iceland is gorgeous everywhere, all the time. Highly recommend it if you haven't been there. But because I wasn't feeling well, I just decided to sort of wander the property. And it started where I was walking on a path, and I could hear someone walking behind me, like very clear boots on gravel kind of sounds. But when I would turn around, no one was there. So I was like, okay, that is unusual. But again, there's a lot of spirit activity happening in Iceland, or at least the parts of Iceland I was seeing. And I started noticing mushrooms. Now, mind you, this was in late September. Winter had actually just started over there. But I was seeing a lot of mushrooms. And I always tell people to do the smart thing. So, of course, I did not do the smart thing, because I am a much better warning than, role model. So I started following these mushrooms off into the woods, which is not what I would encourage other people to do. And I started seeing little fairy rings of mushrooms. And I had a moment where I thought to myself, I really should not be doing this. I'm alone. No one knows where I am. And I'm not feeling well. And I probably should not wander off into the wilderness following mushrooms. But I did. And I ended up in this very strange area, which was almost like a big dugout in the earth. And it was probably a good amount of space, like the size of a large room. And the walls were maybe 5 or 6 feet high. And it's Iceland, so everything's volcanic, so the soil is black. So it's just these black soil walls, and then this very flat area that was also just this black volcanic soil. And I felt very much like I had sort of wandered into something that maybe wasn't actually there. It's a very odd experience, but I remember being there, and there were all these little blue flowers growing up on the ground, and just sort of saying, like, if there's anything that's friendly, kindly inclined here that could help me, because I am not feeling well, and I don't want to have to, go the medical route with this. Like, if anything could just help me. And I meant more in the context of, like, it would either stay the same or maybe improve a little bit. I wasn't asking full on, like, heal me with this. And then I left, and I went back, and that night, I didn't tell anyone about this. But that night I was definitely doing worse. I was running a higher fever, and I was pretty resigned that in the morning I was going to have to ask to go either get some medication or see a doctor. And I woke up at around, I think it was like 3 in the morning. And there were just 3 figures standing around my bed. I was not alone in the room. The person I was traveling with was in a bed, a separate bed in the same room. And she was sleeping. And I looked up, and there were these 3 figures, female. They looked like human women, kind of identical, which was a little odd. And I remember thinking I felt very feverish. And looking up and seeing these women, and just this sort of calm came over me. And I remember distinctly thinking to myself, well, all right, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Which is, again, not what I encourage people. This is not the reaction you should have in this situation. But in the moment, I was just like, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And I went back to bed. And when I woke up a few hours later in the morning, I was perfectly fine. I was not sick at all, no fever, no respiratory anything, no runny nose, no coughing. Like, it was completely fine. And that was the moment I realized, oh, I asked if anyone would help me, and they did. So there are definitely good things that can happen when you have these connections or with these spirits. You know, they're not all dangerous, but caution is still a good idea. Sorry, that's a very long rambling story.
I love that story, and I remember I actually reached out to you about that one, didn't I? Yeah, I really love that. I had something happen very similar, in that I went to heal somebody, a loved one, and they were in hospital, and we didn't know whether they were going to make it. And while I was healing, two beings came either side. So I'm at the feet. I'd worked my way to the feet, and at that point they kind of came in. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But similar to you, the next day there were tests, and the medical team just couldn't believe that the damage, that that the severity of what that they were dealing with was not found at that point.
I love that.
And
I love that.
Amazing. So
yeah,
this can happen, and I think that's a really good point, in that I've spoke to Brother Richard about this, judging it by its fruits. So in that case, you wake up and you're feeling a lot better. If somebody's going towards something and it's just feeling off, it's feeling wrong, they're getting a sense, if what starts to happen in their life hurts them or somebody else in some way, even slightly, it's
yes,
time to back away and to maybe seek advice from somebody that might know more about these things, or
so trust that intuition, trust that gut feeling, because like I said, when I woke up, it was such a sense of calm. And normally if I wake up in a strange place and there are strange people standing around my bed, my reaction is not going to be calm. Obviously it would be frightening and upsetting, but in the moment it just felt very, very peaceful and very safe. And I know I was actually awake. I know it wasn't a dream. My roommate snores a lot, so that's how I know she was sleeping, because she was snoring. I can remember looking and seeing. I could remember everything about the room, which was the actual room. It wasn't like a dream memory of it. But there was such a sense of calm, of like, I don't need to be alarmed about this. And I did. I just went back to sleep. So, yeah.
Oh, really beautiful. I love that. I just can imagine it too. How wonderful. You'll have to go back there, I imagine, because it sounds like this place spoke to you somewhere.
Yeah, I would like to go back to Iceland at some point. It's just an amazing place. On a purely mundane level, it's gorgeous. I mean, it really is. Everything is beautiful there. And then for me, with my particular interest and proclivities and whatever we want to call it, there's so much happening there of a spiritual nature. I could probably go there for months and still be finding new things, experiencing new things.
Yeah, I'd love to get there some days. It sounds, it's not so traversed by humans or parts of it anyway. And so, you have these places that are still very alive with.
Yes, that's a great way to describe it.
Right.
Yes.
But I know that we only had an hour today, so thank you so much for speaking. to me today, Morgan, and we'll, must organise another chat when I'm finished my book. Maybe it might be a really good idea to get you back, because I think that's what keeps pushing everything back, is me sort of trying to finish this book. So I'm really glad that we got a chance to speak today. And are you doing anything for Samhain where you are?
Thank you for having me on quickly. And also, I totally understand about books and scheduling. I actually will be in Ireland this year. I'm getting ready to head back in a week and a half. Slightly terrifying when I say it out loud, but I need to pack and actually get ready to do that. So this year for Samhain, I am actually going to be at the Puka Festival in Athboy. Yeah, and I'm super excited. I've been to Ireland many times. I've been to Athboy before when they used to do the Samhain Festival of Fire years ago. But I haven't had a chance to go back this time of year since then. And now they have this new Puka Festival, which is supposed to be a lot of fun. So I'm sure I will do something spiritual to celebrate as well. But I'm very excited about getting to go to that.
That'll be amazing. Is any of that online for people then? I mean,
the Puka Festival?
Yeah, well, I'm imagining that you're presenting there, or are you just there, sort of soaking up the vibes?
I will be at the festival, just soaking up the vibes, and I'm super excited. I am going over, and I will be presenting a workshop the day before. I'll be talking about effectively how to differentiate ghosts and fairies when you have experiences. Like, there are some things you can kind of look for to tell you whether this is more likely a human haunting situation or a fairy situation. And we'll be traveling for a little bit. We're coming into Dublin and then kind of traveling around, seeing a bunch of locations I haven't gotten to go to before. Like, I'll be at Leap Castle for a little while, which I'm very excited because I've never been there and it has quite a reputation.
Wow, I've visited the places I've mostly visited have been around Cork, and yeah, it's always just there's just so much over there to see. So you're going to have an amazing time. I will put the link to your workshop under this, in the show notes, so that people can get in touch about that then. And I'm really sorry because we didn't even get a chance to talk about your new book, but do you want to just tell people quickly what it's about?
So, Paid with a Kiss, one of the things that I try to do with my work is help people in the 21st century to be more aware not only of the history of some of these things, but also sort of the modern iterations. And one of the most, actually probably the most common question I get asked is, can humans and fairies have more intimate relationships? And a lot of times this gets couched in this sort of, oh, I know this is ridiculous, but I keep having this experience, and I think that's what this is. Could it possibly be? And actually, there is just a huge amount of material going back like 2,000 years, basically, to do with that, with fairies and humans having very close personal relationships. And it is something that does continue today, but people are less open to talking about it, I think, because we've sort of pushed fairies into this intangible, invisible, tiny little spirit category. The idea of like a fairies and humans having any sort of mutual situation happening. I'm trying to be very careful how I phrase all of this, by the way. It's led me to want to write something to just show people, what the history is, that we have all of this material about this topic, including the idea that, fairies and humans can have children together. That goes back a very long way. But that we also do have people today that are continuing with these experiences and practices, and that there's not only historical precedent for the modern stuff, but that the historical precedent isn't where it ends. That it's this, and I think it's the book a lot of people could get a lot out of, whether they're particularly interested in engaging in that way with these spirits or not. I think it's important to understand, the history of it and that it still happens. And also, I find a lot of times with the good folk, with fairies, people limit their expectations, which is part of why I love your healing story so much, because I think that things like that happen more often, but people don't want to talk about them, or they excuse it away and say, oh, well, maybe that would have happened anyway. So I like putting stuff out there that makes people think, maybe this is more interactive and tangible than it seems.
No, for sure. And I just want to quickly say on that, sometimes people, they have something really beautiful happen, and very sadly, they choose the wrong person to tell it to. Somebody that can just kind of really, tear it apart in some way or dismiss it. And that can be the most hurtful thing, particularly if that experience is a really meaningful, beautiful, life-changing experience, so there's that too, isn't there? So,
Yes.
we haven't got time to talk about it now, and I think you need to come back on actually, so that we can talk about this. I have had people contact me, and they have been, they've had interactions that felt very seductive, and but more than that as well, almost that their very being to the core was being, they're yearning for this particular being that's calling them with all of their entire being. They're wanting to go to this being, and they know it's not right. So this is happening.
Yes,
you're right. People might write to me about it, but then that they're reluctant to kind of talk about it, understandably. So this is something I think maybe we'll arrange when I'm finished the book for you to come back on, and then we can have a really good chat about this, because it's not being talked about, and it's happening.
It's not, and I would definitely love to come back on book first, but I would love to come back on because this has been a wonderful chat. And I think that even though we are in a place now where people are more willing to talk about fairy experiences, there's still that sort of hesitancy when it's anything involving like love or intimacy, because people feel like they're going to get mocked or made fun of, or like you said, that beautiful experience is going to get torn apart by someone else. And so when people do talk about it, it is in private communications. Because I've talked to many, many people who do still have these experiences today, but it's that sense of like, I can't share this with people because they wouldn't believe me, even if they would believe other things about fairies in a different context. So yeah, I would definitely love to. We could spend a whole hour just talking about that.
We could spend 2 hours talking about it. Let's face it. I think so. Maybe we'll arrange to do that. Well, thanks again, Morgan. Have an amazing trip to Ireland.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure and an honor, and really great that we finally have chatted, and have a brilliant salmon over there as well.
You as well.
A cool place to be. So all right, speak again and take care.
Yes, have a great day.
Thanks so much for listening and watching. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider joining us on Patreon for dozens more episodes of unreleased bonus content, monthly online events, and a private chat. We are a warm, supportive community, and it really helps to support the project. Find us on patreon.com/the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast.
SpectreVision Radio.